So hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tea with FinEquity. My name is Diana Beja. I'm FinEquity's facilitator, and I'm joined today by Katie Hyatt, Nisha Singh, Jenny Morgan, Mariana Martinez, and Daniel Contreras. You will hear from all of us throughout our sessions. We also have a few speakers, and of course, we look forward to hearing from all of you as well. And a big part of today is about making new connections or deepening existing connections. So to get us started, please introduce yourselves in the chat as well, your name, where you're joining us from today, and please also include a link to your LinkedIn profile and perhaps commit to connecting to at least 5 new people today. And of course, if you're not already on FinEquity's LinkedIn group, make sure you join today. No delays. Our agenda today has 3 parts. We will start with a few rounds of small group networking. After that, we come back here into the main room for an announcement of FinEquity's new initiative and a presentation from our initiative partner. And then we will end with deep dives on 3 topics within FinEquity's learning agenda, which will take place in 3 breakout rooms. So yeah, please share those introductions and LinkedIn profiles while I explain our networking rounds. So we'll get started, as I said, with some fun networking. In a few seconds, we will find ourselves in groups of 4, randomly selected, so we don't know who's going to be in our room. In each group, we will spend about 5 minutes getting to know each other, after which we will be placed in another group of 4 people for another 5 minutes, and then we'll do 1 more round of that. So 3 rounds of 5-minute networking groups composed of 4 people. So if you can, please turn your cameras on for this part. And we have some suggested questions that we can use in our networking rooms. Of course, our name, organization, perhaps a recent accomplishment that we want to share with our colleagues, or what's on your mind currently, work related, or perhaps some priorities that you're currently focusing on, and maybe colleagues in the room can make a connection or a link or a suggestion for us. So if we are ready to go, and I know some people are still coming in, so as they join, they will be placed straight into the networking group. So please help them with the rules of the game for today. So if we are ready and good to get started, let's do it then. And hope I'll see many of you in my rounds. Welcome back. We were kicked out of our networking room just when somebody was telling me I was doing a great job. So that hurt a little bit. We experienced a Zoom flash, as people say, but I hope your networking sessions were great. I know I met a few new people and also got to spend time with some familiar faces, which is always a treat. And now, as I mentioned, our second part of the agenda is to share with you a little bit about a new FinEquity initiative. But before we do that, we have 2 thought-provoking questions that we're grappling with, and we would like to get your input on. And my colleague, we're going to use Slido for this. My colleague Daniel popped this on our screen. The way to get to the questions is go to slido.com, and the code is 229911, or you can also point your phone camera at the QR code and get to the question there. So our first thought-provoking question is, what topics should we stop talking about, or words or concepts should we retire from our collective vocabulary? And I know we've had side conversations, oh, I'm so tired of hearing about this concept. We've already figured it out. Or this terminology doesn't make sense anymore, or we should stop talking about this or that. So yeah, okay, we're getting started. So make 1 or 2 word suggestions. What, from the collective vocabulary of women's financial inclusion, women's economic empowerment, what should we retire? And my colleagues, I know we might have some reactions from my FinEquity colleagues.
I see the business case is getting a lot of, and silver bullet.
Yes.
I'm in full.
The bigger the font, the more people say the same thing. So that's how this word cloud works. If you see
some interesting ones, risk averse, yes, I know. Risk aware, that's the term we want everybody to start using.
All right. I'm curious.
Gender mainstreaming.
Yeah. And I'm seeing Priya in the chat saying gender neutral. It's a good one.
That's just gender blind. There's no such thing as gender neutral.
Definitely needs to be retired then.
Gender
beneficiary, yeah, that's a great one.
I agree actually about gender mainstreaming.
All right. We have about 20 people who contributed. So yeah, tell us. We need a few more entries. What are you tired of hearing about?
I like how the business case has just stayed in the center. So we really need to find an alternative term for that, because we know what we mean. And then as an idea, we shouldn't have to make the case anymore. But what do we do to change people's mind and change the narrative around women's financial inclusion?
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
All right, these are excellent.
Soft skills. I like that.
Feel free to comment in the chat. If you want to offer a why for what you put in the word cloud. But this is great input, and as you heard from our team, we agree with many of these suggestions. So we're going to do something about that through our other FinEquity engagement channels. And our second question, we can move to our second question. You can answer it in the same place. What are we not talking enough about or doing enough about in our sector? Again, make 1 or 2 word suggestions. So, what's something that we should still dive into, or resilience, or we're simply not yet doing enough about financial capabilities. Okay, that's I guess the offer. We had financial literacy, probably we should be focusing on financial capabilities. Men and boys engagement. Wow, look at that. Measuring women's economic empowerment and resilience.
Well, if that's your interest, I have a breakout group coming.
Is that the cue for your breakout room, Jenny?
Yeah, we have a researcher from Mercy Corps talking about, their efforts into measuring resilience and agency capability, confidence, decision making. So if that's your interest, please join us in a few minutes.
Addressing gender norms. Interesting. We're not doing it. We're not yet at the solution stage on that, for sure.
I also like with wealth for women as asset owners, growth-oriented businesses, this whole, just don't think of poor women as having, being deprived. What are the opportunities we have for them? Or what are the opportunities they present?
I think youth is really interesting when we think about the on-ramp to women's financial inclusion? It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. How do we sort of build a sort of financial capability from early ages?
Well, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And on that note, role models, women investors, private sector changes, confidence building. I would like to segue into sharing a little bit more about an initiative we're currently working on. So thank you for this input. Clearly, we have our work cut out for us, and that's been, it's really great. And where all of the inputs resonate, what should we stop talking about, and what should we talk more about and do more about. And on that note, we wanted to take this opportunity to share at all of the Tea with FinEquity events. We share something about what we're currently working on, and something that we're really excited about is an initiative that we're working on with support from USAID. We're leading an action-oriented initiative focused on behavior change in the financial inclusion sector to promote a more gender-balanced workforce and women leadership overall in the financial services sector. And to this end, as a community of practice, the two main things that we will be working on as part of this initiative is curating a resource library focused on proven solutions, lessons learned on recruiting, hiring, promoting, retaining more women in the financial services sector. The resources will also focus on gender analysis tools and the design and delivery of financial products and services that overall help increase women's financial inclusion. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Diana Bonjevaguli, who is a Senior Digital Financial Advisor at USAID with the Digital Finance team at the Bureau for Development, Democracy and Innovation. And I invited Diana to share a little bit more about, why did we select these three themes, and why do we think it's important to have this comprehensive approach? Why it's no longer enough to only focus on one aspect or another? Why we should be doing multiple things at the same time to truly move the needle in the financial services sector. Just a little bit on Diana's background. Before joining USAID, she led Women's World Banking, digital financial services, strategic advisory engagements. In this role, she worked with a variety of providers, banks, mobile money providers, fintechs, to help them improve services to low-income women around the world. And before her time at Women's World Banking, she worked in management consulting at Mondato, where she specialized in digital finance and mobile fintech. And there's a lot more to say about Diana, but I will give her the floor right now to share a little bit with us from her experience and her point of view on why this comprehensive approach is truly needed. And we're delighted to be able to work with you, Diana, on this initiative.
Thanks for having me, Diana. And you guys should see us in meetings with the two Dianas and people trying to direct which Diana they're talking to. It gets pretty funny. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here, and great to see some old friends. I'm not going to name names because, but yeah, I see you guys. Very good to see you. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk a little bit more about why we decided to work with FinEquity on this exciting initiative. It's needed, well needed, and we couldn't have found a better partner. So very happy to be here. And yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'll just directly dive in why we're doing this. So yeah, we all know that despite a lot of evidence demonstrating women's value in the workforce, women continue to encounter structural barriers and systemic discrimination that prevents them from participating fully in the global economy. And this is particularly true in certain traditionally male-dominated industries, such as financial services and telecom. I'm sure you all have been to a conference where all you can see is a sea of suits. Mobile World Congress is a case of point, like 100,000 suits, and maybe a few women. So yeah, around the world, women hold less than 20% of board seats in banks and bank supervising agencies, and there's only less than 2% of women CEOs at banks around the world, which is crazy. And in my previous job, as some of you here already know, I used to provide technical assistance to banks on how to better, not only banks, but financial services providers, on how to better serve women customers, or how to increase the number of women customers that they have. And those financial services providers were mainly in Africa and in Asia. And if you're looking at East West Africa, there were women to be seen in the offices, but in some other regions, maybe one or two. Like I have been in a couple of offices without any women. So how are we supposed to design services for women if there aren't any in the office? It's how we're supposed to do that. So yeah, even though there is so much clear evidence that gender diverse teams are better equipped to drive innovative solutions, inclusive for women, in all their diversities, financial institutions, especially financial institutions, can still benefit from greater gender equality in their workforce and leadership ranks. We know that banks with women leaders have superior financial performance. We know they are more stable and more resilient during crisis. Seen this in the past couple of years. When more women provide input and make decisions about markets, product development, really all levels of the financial institution are more likely to be aware that there is this underserved market that they're missing on. And when more women have a seat at the table and can influence decisions that are being made about these markets, about target client profiles, about product development, they really have expanded opportunities to advocate for potential women customers, especially in those underserved markets. And there are many demonstration cases, use cases, many tools, data insights. They're becoming more and more available to guide financial institutions who are looking to evaluate a pivot towards more inclusive, gender inclusive business models and offering more gender intelligent product design. The tools are there. And really without thoughtful changes such as these, institutions can cater more effectively to women's needs and challenges. And a gender balanced workforce is good for business. We know that. According to a 2018 ILO survey, when boards are gender balanced, companies are almost 20% more likely to have enhanced business outcomes. And another stat was that companies with 30% women in their leadership at 6% net profit margins or increase. So financial inclusion, as was revealed by COVID-19 in the past two years now, is critical to enabling women to build their financial security and prosperity, and really ultimately contributes to women's economic empowerment. So the global pandemic, as we know, has disproportionately impacted women in the workforce through substantially increased household and care responsibility and decreased mobility, because they didn't have those before the pandemic. It's increased now even more than before. So the time really is now to double down on our efforts to regain traction and improve gender diversity in financial services. Now is the time for financial services providers with strong gender diverse teams equipped to drive innovative solutions that are inclusive of women in all their diversity. So we're very, very happy to be working on this initiative with FinEquity, and I don't know when we can announce what is happening, but please stay tuned. More is to come very soon, and we'll keep you busy in the next few months.
Very busy. I like that, Diana. Thank you so much. And indeed, the time is now, and we're so excited for this initiative. And we are busy at FinEquity, and I know our members are busy as well, as we were collecting resources from the community, and we're just putting them, organizing them into these resource guides. So stay tuned. you will see more on this initiative, and we look forward to your engagement as well. So thank you so much, Diana. Appreciate you joining us today to give us a preview and a flavor of what's coming. And without further ado, I would like to move to segue into our last portion of the agenda, the 3 deep dives in the 3 breakout rooms. And I will invite my colleagues, Jenny, Katie, and Nisha, to tell us a little bit about what's going to happen in the breakout rooms, so you can make your choice of where you would like to join. So I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but maybe we can still give a one-line invitation and introduction. So Jenny, I'll let you go first, and then Katie, and then Nisha.
Sure, I just popped in a longer description there into the chat, but we're going to be hearing from a Mercy Corps researcher on how they've looked at resilience and measuring resilience for women. So please join us if you're interested in that. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, in room 2, we're going to be looking at DFS and climate, and specifically, if DFS can improve women's resilience and to climatic events and shocks.
And in room 3, we're going to talk about addressing gender norms, specifically around entrepreneurship. And we have a great speaker talking about some insights on COVID-19 and how it impacted women's entrepreneurship.
Thank you. So room 1, impact pathways, room 2, DFS, and room 3, Nisha's room. I see on the bottom of your screen, you see the little icon with breakout rooms. So please just join a room that you would like to participate in, and then we will see you there.
How financial services and non-financial services can play a role in addressing some of those barriers. So when we began the work, we first started with a global literature review, just to really understand where the evidence on key constraints lie, where we see a lot of kind of interventions looking to address some of those constraints, and where we see some gaps. And what we ended up with was a focus on kind of 2 key areas, which were rural women's access and returns to both labor and markets. And then there are kind of some subcategories in there. I would encourage you to go look at some of our research that we've published on cgap.org and on the FinDev Gateway, where you can get a little bit more information on sort of what's contained within each of those buckets. But what we also saw were there were cross-cutting issues, that have an impact on both women's access to labor and also to markets. And those are socio-cultural norms and also climate change. And what we realized was, after kind of this initial stage of research, was that we can say that climate change is a major threat to rural women's livelihoods. We know that they are disproportionately impacted by a changing climate, but we really don't know much about what sort of solutions can actually help them to address the impact of climate shocks, to mitigate against the risk of climate change, and also to improve their resilience. So we recently started a research effort to look at the literature around women's access to financial services and use of financial services and resilience to climate. And so I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what we found. And maybe just to start with a major caveat, which is what we found is that we actually don't know much. So what we do know is that when women have access to a financial account, it can empower them to make decisions about household investments. And so theoretically, this could allow them to more effectively invest in climate adaptation and risk mitigation. So for example, diversifying their incomes so that their income generating activities aren't all concentrated in one crop or in just agriculture, or investing in climate smart agricultural practices, new crops, or even tools like, say, mechanization, et cetera. We also know that DFS, like mobile money, provide women with greater control over financial resources, obviously because of the privacy that it provides. Now, this is also very much true for cash transfers. So there is evidence that targeting cash transfers to women using mobile money improves their ability to actually have control over those funds and effectively invest them. So theoretically, again, we could make the hypothesis that in a climate emergency that mobile money DFS could provide an effective channel for delivering assistance to women. We also know that mobile money expands women's social networks, allowing them to better cope with various types of shocks. Now, the evidence is mostly around health shocks, but theoretically, we could think that that could be of use in the event of a climate shock as well. And then we also have quite a bit of evidence around savings, that women's use of savings can serve as a cushion against shocks. Again, though, this is really around health shocks, the evidence here. And we also find that a lot of the strongest evidence is around more informal savings, like VSLAs. So the digital angle there is less clear. We know that linking women's groups to formal credit from microfinance institutions is shown to promote women's investment in agriculture, including labor. Now, one of the key constraints that we found in a changing climate is that, for example, climate smart agriculture practices are quite labor intensive, right? It requires more time, and women are often facing time poverty. So having access to financing that improves their use of labor, that could theoretically help with climate adaptation. And then we also know that access to microcredit is shown to support crop diversification. So this also could theoretically support resilience to climate shocks. And then we see examples of digital channels being used for access to things like solar water pumps, other sorts of tools that can help women to address irregular rainfalls. We know that digital channels can expand women's access to microinsurance. And we know that bundling financial services like credit and insurance with training in climate smart agriculture practices can promote resilience to climate shocks. However, it's unclear whether the impact there is primarily the result of access to training. Now, what we don't know, which is actually a lot. So as you may have noticed, a lot of what I laid out there does not have a specific digital angle beyond some of the examples around mobile money. And so we really don't know very much about the role of DFS in climate resilience. And that's not to say that DFS can't play a role. It's just to say that the research hasn't been done. And so there's a major research gap that needs to be addressed. We also, much of what we know about finance and resilience, even non-digital finance, is really about resilience to shocks, is really about resilience to health shocks. We don't know much about climate shocks. Theoretically, we could extrapolate some of that evidence to say that that would be also applicable in the event of a climate shock, but it's not what the evidence says. The other thing is, there's a lot that's been said about promoting women's access to microinsurance as a way of increasing their resilience to climate shocks. But really, the evidence is quite mixed. We have some anecdotal evidence that shows that women are, in some cases, more likely to purchase insurance. So, for example, there have been some case studies out of East Africa that show that women are more likely to purchase crop insurance or livestock insurance. But what we don't know is what really the impact of that is. And even what we've seen is that in some cases, the evidence shows that insurance is not a sufficient coping mechanism when it comes to climate shocks. So there was one case study out of East Africa from one of the biggest microinsurers that showed that even though women's uptake of microinsurance, this is weather index insurance, was quite strong, the actual impact of that climate insurance or that index insurance was somewhat limited. Something like only 20% of the women who took out an insurance policy saw an increase in resilience to climate shocks, whereas something like 74% of them experienced a climate shock in the last 12 months. So really what we don't really know is sort of, we need more evidence. So anyway, I know that I said a lot. Katie, I know you wanted to open it up to discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Max. You've done a great job of highlighting all the things we don't know. I think it's talking to a lot of you and sort of listening, within the field in the last 4 or 5 months, I've heard climate discussed so much, but the linkages seem very tangential in terms of evidence. And so I'm really interested to hear from you. And I know we don't have a huge amount of time, but I'm hoping that you can signal by putting your hand up or reacting with a hands up at the bottom of your screen. Do you see a link between DFS and women's resilience to climatic shocks? Okay, I'm seeing one hand up. I'm seeing one hand unsure, two hands up. Yeah, it seems very, I'm seeing a few hands up and a few nods, but not necessarily a strong link. Do you think that amongst people in the financial inclusion sector that this is an assumed link? No, not necessarily. And I'd love to hear from some of you. You know, if you want to take yourselves off mic or you know, open up in the chat. You know, what are the resources that you are both seeking and using in this space? You know, and that really, our breakout rooms do not close in 20 minutes for anyone. We're closing in about 7 minutes. But just thinking about the kinds of lens that you're all looking at this through, or you're thinking about this through, you know, what are the resources that you have or don't have or are seeking? Yeah, and that's interesting. You know, I think Nandini, you're saying that you just don't see the link yet.
No, I said I'm not sure if everyone immediately understands what the connections are between all the pieces. I'm actually working on a blog on this for the FinEquity leadership technical advisory leadership series, and I think there's a piece on energy and access to energy, solar asset financing. Max and I have talked a little bit about this, but I think it's all hypotheses. Like I was writing the blog, and I had assumed that there was going to be data behind all, like you said, all the links between the parts of this, right? And there isn't enough. There isn't enough hard research. Exactly what Max was saying, and so I think we have some hypotheses, especially around how clean energy, solar asset financing, solar energy can both be an adaptation tool and a mitigation tool for women. But there's a lot of testing, a lot of research that's still needing to be done around that. And the one thing that may be inhibiting that is there's a bigger emphasis on the rural and rural-urban divide in terms of several of these things, including energy access. And maybe it's stronger than the gender divide. And that's, I think, one of the first hypotheses to be tested in terms of importance on emphasis. But I feel like we're still in, as an industry, really early stages in really understanding where's the opportunity to actually improve women's livelihoods through climate change interventions, related interventions.
And I think it's really, you know, if you think back to 10 years ago when we were thinking about women and mobile phones, and there was very much this belief, you know, if you build it, they will come. And, you know, we just have to get mobile phones in the hands of women, and everything will be, you know, will just work out naturally. And I think that looking at how that worked out or didn't work out, we need to be really careful about the assumptions that we're making and the linkages that we're drawing, you know, in the face of such, you know, limited evidence. How much can we apply from health resilience and health shocks? I don't know. I'm wondering if anyone else, Priya, you had made a comment in the chat about, you know, how are we trying to measure the impact? You know, is it that it's about her resilience to climatic shocks? I mean, I think that these are really good questions, and we're still trying to figure out the hypotheses. I don't know if you want to speak to that further.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, see, if we are measuring it with by tracking or by checking her mobile phone usage, we don't know whether she's actually using it or her son or her husband is doing it for her. So to build that link, and how do we, so far the evidence, what we heard is related to her resilience to health shocks. I think we could safely use it as a proxy for for resilience to climate shocks, because health outcomes are a big part of her overall resilience. But one idea comes to me is to check, Like during any shock, say climate shock, is she taking more credit? Is she accessing insurance? Those would be ways to close to join the dots and go forward in terms of more studies, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of can build a foundation, but then how we look to build evidence, what behaviors are taking place when there is a climate shock. I'm wondering, and I know that we've got a couple of minutes and we can stay on the line a little bit if people are open for it. But how are you looking at resources? Are there resources that you turn to? Are there organizations that you feel that are particularly at the forefront? What would be useful to you as you sort of start to think through these issues? And I don't know, Diana, if Diana Guli, if your hand is up because you want to say something.
No, I just wanted to add something. I think for me, it goes even further back as to the definition. What do we mean exactly digital finance for climate resilience? Because like, what do we mean by climate shocks too? Like, are we considering COVID a climate shock, right? Like what exactly, because it could be linked, right? So what are we talking about? And like, for me, I would even go back and think about digital finance. I would even not necessarily only look at products, but I would also think about the infrastructure. So like a climate shock could be a flood or a earthquake. And if all the digital finance infrastructure is gone, like how am I accessing any of that? So I would even think about that like as a bucket, and then we go towards the products. So like as we've seen during COVID, the countries with better digital finance infrastructure were better able to disburse payments. So I like for me, that's another step.
And that's really interesting, and it sort of makes me think of another question as I was thinking through this. And I'm not saying that we should go one way or another, but when you all think about, women and climate, do you think about it through a product lens, or do you think about it through more of a customer segmentation lens? What makes more sense to you? Because often, when we've driven with products as a sector, we have, absolutely kind of led with the solution. But often, as I see people talking about climate, it's almost entirely through products.
And I've heard usually it's like, I think we would benefit from like a chart of explaining what do we mean and like what are those products. I've heard a lot of people, the majority of the focus is like we'll focus a lot on insurance. And then if you think about insurance, I'm not an insurance expert by any means, but I've heard issues around climate, what's it called? Like climate index insurance. It's very hard to make it work. So it's like, what are those products exactly? Like, let's outline them and maybe look at the evidence around each of them. And I mean, there's so much that can be done and we're so early in the game. But I think I'm very glad that we're starting to look at that. And now is the time to kind of build the foundation and really get the evidence and define what we're looking at. Because like, even for mobile money and digital payments, we still don't have a definition that like everybody agrees on. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really great to be able to ask the questions, what does this, rather than sort of like, bursting forward with the solutions or the answers, as, of course, no one in this sector has ever done, to be able to take the time. How are there any other sort of major comments, or, Nandini, thank you so much for adding that resource into the chat. If I remember that resource, that's a few years old, isn't it? Just opening it.
It is, but I feel like it's a great starting point. If we're asking kind of the questions Diana is asking, how do we define climate change, which I think we have to start with. If we're talking about building resilience to climate change, how do we define it? And there's some measurement elements to it. So I think it's a nice starting point. It's not focused on gender, but it talks about the relationship between poverty and climate change and disaster resilience. And I think it's a nice starting point.
Definitely. And I can see, I don't know if you're on mute. It looks like you're on mute. Jemana from BRAC, I would be really interested to hear how BRAC are thinking about this. And I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself and say something, but yeah, I'd love to hear from you about your approach.
For I'm working for BRAC Microfinance. So as part of microfinance, we are actually planning for doing some more research, whether there is any relationship with climate change and especially women's livelihood. We are actually planning for it. There are many cases that there are
You're breaking up slightly. Oh no, that's no. Yeah, I think you've actually now disappeared. Okay, well, I will be sure to follow up with you about that. And I think that if there are resources, I'm really happy to do a share out from this group of resources that we've sort of come across. Certainly, I have bookmarked a ton over the last few months as I've been sorting through this. I'm just wondering if there are any other thoughts that people have, that people want to share around what would be useful, how you're thinking about it. I really like Diana's idea of just sort of defining what do we actually mean. What does insurance mean in the face of climate? What does access to markets or pricing information, what is the implication, and then what is the hypothesis? So it's really like what are our assumptions, and who's testing it? Yeah. So I mean, unless and Max, I don't know if you want to very briefly talk about the work that Women in Rural and Agricultural Finance is doing, the literature review.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know we've already run over, but just to say that in the coming months, we should be releasing a review of the evidence around rural women's vulnerability to climate change, strategies to improve their resilience, including the role of financial services. Admittedly, a lot of what I said earlier is going to also be reflected in that deck. I think we learned more about what we don't know than what we do know. But we do try to highlight some of the evidence that we think could provide some hypotheses for how we might approach improving rural women's resilience. So we'll definitely send out a notification to the FinEquity group once that's published.
Excellent. And it's really great to have a group of people who I know are certainly interested and engaged on this topic. So I will send around some resources to this group that I found somewhat useful, and ask you all to kind of chime in on it if there are other things that you think we should add. Great to know that you're also focused on it, Nandini. So I'm sure we'll connect. But I'll close off this now, unless anyone else has anything to add. Thank you for a really interesting conversation. It's sort of been very useful to me anyway, and confirming a lot of my concerns or my thinking around the lack of evidence. It's kind of one of those, it struck me as one of those things that everyone is talking about it, but there's actually less action when you scratch beneath the surface. And that's okay, better evidence before action.
Yeah, just to add, this is just the beginning, and I'm seeing some interesting approaches. And what would be interesting as well is to outline what tools do we have. So we're what do we have? We can increase investment in the space. We can help with TA for product development. What do we have at our disposal? What are our tools? I was just speaking with BFA Global. So they're having what they're trying to do is they're trying to increase the number of businesses that are doing digital finance for climate resilience. So they're going to do a company builder, and then they also have an accelerator for already existing companies. But with the accelerator, they've noticed there isn't enough companies to accelerate. So they're like, oh man, we got to build them first. So there are different approaches. It'll be interesting to see what are the tools that we have.
Definitely.
But I just want to share that I find that's an interesting approach.
Thanks so much. That's great. That's great context. All right, everyone. Thanks very much. I'll share the recording of this session, and just for anyone who's interested, and I'll also share some resources. But I really appreciate your input as we sort of do a bit of a brain dump around what we know and what we don't know, and what these hypotheses potentially could look like. So without further ado, I wish you a productive and happy rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Data analysis that I conducted, over 400 million women are involved in businesses worldwide. And that number breaks down in the GEM data. We actually are looking at the people who are starting businesses. So entrepreneurs by definition for us are people who are starting businesses. And that's 274 million women right now are starting and running new businesses, right? Less than 42 months old. And another 139 million women are running businesses over 42 months. And I think that it's really important to understand that we have this huge sizable population of women involved in business growth. Is this slide big enough, or do you want me to go to full screen? I can do full screen.
Full screen would be good, I think. Yeah, let's just do that.
And so women are already making a big impact. I'm putting out a big call to let's reframe the problem and start talking about how women are trailing men all the time in the top line numbers. We understand why those top line numbers are different. And I think we need to focus on the fact that women represent 1 in 3 innovative, growth-oriented entrepreneurs in the world. And, and over 40% of all entrepreneurs in the world. And women are also very active in informal investment. So they're also investing in businesses. And we don't talk enough about this. Just to give you a little bit of flavor of what the GEM data says around gender and pandemic impacts, we captured this data April through August of 2020. So it's just the first snapshot. We'll have more coming in our next report. But in terms of business closures, it was actually the women due to the pandemic, it was actually women in high income countries that reported the most business closure as a result of the pandemic, middle income and low income. But we know the women entrepreneurs who were impacted in low income countries took some of the biggest hits, right? And so how do we make sense of this data? When we look at pandemic, the difficulty of starting a business, again, it was the women in high income countries. I should explain this chart. This is a parity chart comparing men to women, and the blue line represents parity. So if they're below parity, it means men were more likely. If they're above parity, it means women were more likely and men to report. And so the pandemic difficulty to start a business, it was women in high income countries who reported that problem. Again, how do we understand these data? And then from an opportunity perspective, it was actually women in middle income countries who were more likely than their male peers to say they saw new opportunities, while women in high income and especially in low income did not see opportunities as a result of the pandemic. So these are some examples of the top line numbers where we're often saying women are trailing men. And these are global numbers. We know our sample changes every year, so we have to be careful about interpreting global data when the countries are different in the data set every year. When we kind of dig a little bit deeper and look at women in emerging economies, these women are actually very vibrant entrepreneurs. And these charts, again, we're showing parity, and these are our high performance measures. So how many women are entrepreneurs, how many are starting businesses with more than 6 employees, how many are growth oriented, how many have innovative offerings, high export activity, and are participating as informal business investors. And here again, we see a lot of variation across income levels of countries. And these women in the low income countries are very active in high growth and innovative offerings. These are obviously less developed markets. And so this is just to say that, you know, once this size fits all policy is not easy, but these women in emerging economies are more active in entrepreneurship than women in other economies. They have smaller businesses, but high growth aspirations, high innovation, lower export activity, which is one area where we can focus, in very high rates of informal investment. And then here are some specific countries. This is the best way to look at the GEM data. And you'll notice how different the patterns are across countries. So again, one size fits all policy or solutions are limited. These solutions really need to be tailored to the specific context. And that's where gender norms play a role, because we know that the culture can change a lot. But also the structural factors can change a lot from one setting to another. One of the reasons why women trail men is because their businesses are in sectors with lower profit margins, more competition, low barriers to entry, which is a good thing. But these are sectors where small businesses are the norm, right? So it's not just gender norms, but also the sectors they're participating in. And this is where I think we end up reinforcing those stereotypes, the gender stereotypes that say women aren't as good as business, is because those top line numbers are misleading. We have to dig deeper. So sector size are two of the most important predictors. Of course, we understand that family circumstances also really hurt women in the pandemic. And Nisha, I'll just leave this as the last slide. This idea that culture and structure create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if we don't reframe this conversation around women's entrepreneurship and look to the fact that women are growth-oriented entrepreneurs, then how are we going to change the problem?
Great, thanks, Amanda. I'd love reactions from the people on this call. I'm sure there's questions, but I'll just ask, how many people knew that number of that 1 in 3 growth-oriented enterprises around the world are run by women? Just curious. You can unmute yourself and speak because we're a small enough group.
No idea. Surprising, I would say.
Yeah, I think the reason why I really wanted Amanda to speak is that I think, you know, we had that discussion earlier about terms to retire, business case. This is the business case. Like, we have this weird, you know, there's these assumptions about what women-owned businesses are, how they function, where they are, how profitable they are, and a lot of it is based in just, you know, misperceptions. So how do we address those misperceptions? And that's one part of the gender norms discussion. It's not, yes, we need to do work with women entrepreneurs themselves, but change the ecosystem around them as well. But I'll stop talking and let people react.
Well, Nisha, I'd love to comment on something where I'd like to invite you guys to pay some attention to. I've been working with the WeFi team on this concept of a value model. They were one of the sponsors of our last women's report. But this concept of a value model, and we all appreciate those value models, right? The idea if we support women's entrepreneurship, it's going to grow the global economy by X trillion dollars. And we know those are important, but, you know, we're actually compounding the problem by using those models, because those models are based on the assumption that if women start and grow businesses the same way that men do, we will create society. And we're never going to get there unless we're paying attention to structural problems, and those aren't going to change unless we're encouraging women to start businesses in male-dominated industries where the profit margins are higher. You know, and then who's going to do the work that they're doing? We run into this whole thing again of, like, women are primary caregivers of the home, but also get a job. And oh, by the way, don't forget to maximize your economic, you know, potential the same way that your husbands or the other men do in the world too. And it's like, well, who's going to take care of the house? Who's going to take care of the family? Marketplace? Who's going to start the businesses that serve healthcare and education and, you know, and people with high needs and all of those fantastic businesses? Who's going to start the businesses that make life worth living, right? Eating at good restaurants, going to good concert venues, and taking your kids to museums and playgrounds. And so that's one of the things that I would love to hear your perspective on. Like, what does a better value model look like? No one has any ideas? It's hard, right?
Yeah,
Really hard.
I mean,
go ahead.
okay. I mean, I only have opinions. I don't have anything based in real data. But I think one of the things that bugs me the most about the way we do our work is like, well, there's going to be a solution, or there's going to be a product or whatever, and we, as you were saying, Amanda, the baseline is male, what men have done, and then how do we fit women in? But I don't know how to explode that, but it's clear that that's not working. And there are going to be a million different value models, and that needs to be okay. And it's just not easy to measure. And so we get frustrated with it. We're like, well, but we need to make the case to private sector. Well, Jesus Christ, we have. So they just need to figure out, we all just need to what is it? Just redefine risk, redefine investment, redefine what business looks like and what success is, redefine who shareholders are. I just find all of this stuff to be like, this is the thing we've done forever. It is clearly fine and normal and working, and women are the abnormal. And we need to figure out how they can fit. Well, no. Also, clearly it's not working because we're missing 50% of the population. So anyway, those are just my little bitty bits.
Anyone else? As I said, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat if you don't feel like speaking.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Neeru Batra from Harmony Talks India. I'm here as an independent consultant though. Well, I feel we need to have a women's happiness index, to connect with the business aptitude and a lot of other things which are parameters in understanding how much initiative they want to take into getting into business, apart from raising children, and then how resilient they are in times like pandemic. And things are very much related to the happiness index, I feel, because women would certainly leave their business only if they're not happy with what they're doing. And as long as things are profitable, yes, but apart from that, happiness would be a major index.
Great, interesting idea. Tembo?
Hi, colleagues. Hi, everyone. I'm from Gresham Marshall Trust, based in Johannesburg. I think, again, for me, it's not based on any specific data, but I guess it's also based on my experiences as a Black African woman raised by African women. There's an assumption with the value model that women are not participating, but it's a matter of how are you measuring that participation? Because when you look at African communities, and it goes back to the business case scenario, what are those stories that are making it as a business case? Because I'm concerned about the stories that we do not hear, the positive stories of women who are taking their kids to school. They're working in the informal sector, but somehow they're contributing and participating in the economy in such a way that they're able to raise communities. And I'm a product of that. So are we saying that the existing value model is what we are saying is that the existing value model does not measure those type of metrics in terms of the way women are showing up, right, in participating in particular economies. And that needs to be acknowledged and recognized. So again, changing the lens in what we are viewing in terms of how women are participating vis-a-vis they're not participating. And it goes back to saying, what is that value model that can identify those bright spots where we are saying in certain communities, in African cultures, there is a matriarch. How do we leverage from a solution that already exists in those in those communities and package it in a way that you can integrate it in the existing market economies, as opposed to trying to create a solution that is not based on the user's insight, that is not based on the experiences and how women actually live their lives in those economies.
Great, thanks, Tembo. That was really, I think, valuable that women are making contributions in so many ways, which is not accounted for. So how do we bring that into the calculation? Anyone else? I don't want to call on people, which is why I'm.
Nisha, I'll add something, as a gender scholar, we've done a lot of research, and certainly in the field of sociology over decades now, and historically as well, that document that even when women, and this is particularly true in agricultural or poor contexts, but when women actually are generating income for the family, their activities are actually not defined as work. Often they're invisible, even though they're bringing money into the house, it's not counted. How much of that pattern is being reflected in the marketplace activity today? Again, women's work is invisible. It's not being counted, it's not being credited. And we are making advances, at least we have over the last 30 years I've been involved in women's entrepreneurship. We're seeing the data change, but the top line story isn't changing. And so it's like, how do we make the invisible visible? And how do we build on the strength that's already there?
Yes, explode the model. It's male focused and can't be male focused. Yes, yes.
I would love to add to that, Amanda, Julia, really great comments. And again, I think it's a lot of trial and error of what works to really expand the model and really engage women. One thing we have seen, and this is years back, but we actually created, so we were working on rural entrepreneurs. So in the farming communities, it was Paraguay-based project. And women farmers were absolutely not able to get access to any credit. And once we did a very kind of, just tracking meticulous cash flow of who brings money into the household, turned out they are the bigger brand winners. I mean, they are bringing the cash, surprise, surprise. But the important part of that story is that the bank actually listened to this and created a whole set of products, outreach, and started serving that customer. So to me, I think there's some questions around, well, who should know about this? We know about this, but we're not the decision makers, or many of us in financial institutions that are actually providing services. So how do we package that information? What's needed there to really bring evidence? I'm not gonna say the business case, but something needs to be there to switch that mindset. And it's really important because there is money on the table that's literally sitting there. And again, that's what potentially financial services providers care about, but so be it. If it helps change their mind and there is expansion of services, products, and loans and non-financial services to women, it's a win-win, so to speak.
No, that's a great story. And I think it ties back really well with this idea of, okay, how do we change this narrative completely on its head and this, address this issue of assumptions and misperceptions by creating and making more visible all the contributions that women make in what are pure economic terms and economic adjacent terms, which allow the economy to function the way it does, right? Without the unpaid care economy, the other economy doesn't function.
Nothing else can exist.
Yeah. So how do, and that's why I wanted to have this discussion, is part of like changing norms is making people aware of how their perceptions are completely unfounded or founded on wrong information.
Right.
So as a community, can we think about ways to highlight this and create a different narrative and craft a different narrative? To me, that when I was reading the report that Amanda authored, just that the fact that 1 in 3 women entrepreneurs are women, and most women across the globe in developing countries see entrepreneurship as an opportunity, and they're already part of it. That's not visible to most people. So most people making decisions, how do we get that information out to them? Sure, go ahead.
I think since she's been looking at this space, I mean, how much measurement has improved? I mean, we have better statistics, but obviously this is because measurements have been made. But what is your perception of how broad measurement is, how consistent, so that is this the way for us to make this more visible, as Nisha just said? I mean, 1 in 3 is a number that we know now, but what other numbers are there that we need to know, and we still don't know, and is there a way to improve the measurement and make it consistent?
I think the GEM program significantly boosted our ability to really measure early stages of business activity and established activity in the informal as well as the formal economy. And so that's one of the greatest contributions the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor has really brought to management. From a gender perspective, we measure gender, so it opened up the door for really understanding, how the business characteristics, the industry sectors, and all sorts of other behaviors that are linked to starting and growing businesses. There are some other great data sets out there too, though, like the World Bank's enterprise survey data. It's not looking at new businesses per se, but looking at female-led businesses and male-led businesses. What you actually see, they actually ask about what portion of your employee base are females, and so that data actually shows us across countries that women-led businesses are more likely to employ women. And so what I will say is that the overall conversation in management's been changed by this kind of data. And the shift really is, maybe our programs and policies shouldn't focus on driving more women to start businesses. Maybe our focus should be on building programs that help women grow the businesses they're already running. And that's a really different approach to programming.
I think there is a lot.
Yeah, particularly because
here. Oh, go Julia, go.
Marina, sorry. I was just going to say, particularly because the narrative that, we should encourage all low-income women to become entrepreneurs is like really crusty with the original, microcredit kind of idea. And not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. It kind of sucks, actually. So if we can grow the business, then you can be an employee. And isn't that better for everyone?
And on that point, just Amanda, on the shift of paradigm, even for what we're focusing on around not necessarily encouraging women to start businesses, but rather to grow businesses, what I've been thinking a lot about, and I'd love thoughts on kind of how to kind of further structure our thinking around it is, but it seems like there is a big gap around transitioning women micro businesses into larger businesses. Yes. So what is the gap there? What's not happening? Why it's not happening? Why shouldn't a woman not have a business with 10 employees? And and that's a huge economic engine, because now you're an employer, you're creating more jobs, you're obviously bringing a lot more income into the family. To me, that's a really powerful space to explore. So I'll just even put emphasis on that, grow your business, but really transform them into larger businesses. And what do we need to get there? I would love conversations around that, because I personally haven't seen a lot of success in that transformation. I just would love to know what's needed to make that happen. And
I think frame of reference, I'll tell you from, the university, the higher education approach to entrepreneurship education, most students who take entrepreneurship classes don't go and start businesses, at least not right away, right? Not until their 30s. But what it does do is it gives them sort of a broader perspective on how to start and grow a business, and helps them be a better employee, and helps them learn the things they need later on to do it. And so a lot of the programming that like Julia was talking about, just trying to encourage all women to start a business, entrepreneurship education is probably something we all should know something about, right? Because that's how our economies work. But we don't necessarily have to go and start a business with it. Those of us who do start a business, what's missing there is the next level. This is why financial access is one of the most important issues, right? So I think some of the most encouraging trends we're seeing around the financing piece of it are women investors, women investing in businesses that create a world they want to live in. This is how we're transforming ecosystems, right? And women growing unicorns. They're literally growing businesses and putting themselves in the seat of industry leaderships, and it's having an impact. So how do we build the systems to support? And for me, I use the term innovation pipeline. And that is when you run an entrepreneurship program, you always have this handful of students who are really exceptional. And it's not to say everybody else can't figure out how to run exceptional businesses at some point in their lives, but there's always in the moment, there's always, and so that's the sort of last mile programs that I've been working with is how do you build a business booster? How do you identify those individuals and move their businesses forward in the innovation pipeline? Because we have sort of a gap. You can help them start it and it's hand to mouth. And then if they get to a certain point, the business, they're employing lots of men, who's in charge, nobody knows, but financing is not so hard at that point because the revenue is really telling the story. But we have this gap, like women have a harder time getting to that point. So what structures do we need to put in place to make that happen? And microfinance is fine for the startup phase, but that's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're talking about business financing. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Now, the great discussion. I'm so glad that everybody stayed on for a few extra minutes. I think we'll continue this conversation in certain ways. At the point, Marina, you were saying that transition point from micro to small, medium, that is where, the growth opportunities are, but that's also where we have like this big black hole. It always comes down to collateral, and we know we're trying to solve that, but what else and how else and how do you make it work?
So I know that my researcher brain is now, I've got like 15 more questions I'm gonna
great.
answer.
Great.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I'm glad we have lots of food for thought over here. And for me, this is exactly what these kinds of groups are for, to help us kind of think through what are the topics and how do we pursue and bring together people who are doing work and asking the right questions and then testing that out. So we'll be focusing on that. I want to thank Amanda for sharing her thoughts, and you'll be hearing from many of us probably. And thank you everyone else for joining this discussion. Hopefully you'll stay engaged. And as you leave, there'll be a FinEquity, our annual survey that'll pop up. We'd love to hear your feedback, so take a few minutes if you have the time to fill it out. But thank you so much, everyone. It's a great discussion.
Thank you, Nisha. Thank you, Julia. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining the tea today. And as you walk out, you will be directed to filling out our member survey. So please do that if you have 5 minutes. That would be really helpful for us.
Great to see everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Diana. Bye.